Good afternoon. The firebombing of an immigration processing centre in Kent was motivated by extreme right-wing ideology and met the threshold for a terror incident, police have said. 66-year-old Andrew Leake carried out the attack at the site in Dover last Sunday. 2 members of staff at the centre were left with minor injuries. He is believed to have later taken his own life. John Donnison has the latest.
An act of terror. This is the moment Andrew Leake threw one of up to 3 makeshift firebombs in a drive-by attack on a migrant processing centre in Dover last Sunday. Today, police said Leake was motivated by terrorist ideology. In a statement, Tim Jack, the Senior National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism Policing, said after considering the evidence collected so far, whilst there are strong indications that mental health was likely a factor, I'm satisfied that the suspect's actions were primarily driven by an extremist ideology. This meets the threshold for a terrorist incident. The suspect, Andrew Leake, is thought to have taken his own life shortly after the attack, which police say was likely motivated by extreme right beliefs. It led to around 700 migrants being transferred from the Dover processing centre to this one at Manston, which was already overcrowded. The Home Secretary flew into Manston on Thursday, but Suella Braverman is facing a possible legal challenge over detention conditions there. The day after last weekend's firebomb attack in Dover, she told MPs that Britain was facing an invasion of illegal migrants.
We have to be really careful about the words that we use and the rhetoric when we talk about anything to do with migration. It's really dangerous, and I think that type of language is a absolute trigger for the acts that we've seen down in Dover.
The government says the real problem is the number of migrants continuing to cross the Channel, and that fixing an asylum system, which it describes as broken, is a first-order priority. John Donnison, BBC News.
Rail passengers have been facing severe disruption today despite strike action being called off. Tens of thousands of rail workers had been due to walk out in the long-running dispute over pay and working conditions. Strikes planned for Monday and Wednesday have also been cancelled as negotiations between the RMT union and train operators are stepped up. Here's our business correspondent Mark Ashdown.
No strike, no picket line, but no trains either. Today's walkout was called off with such little notice, rail operators say it was too late to run trains they'd already cancelled. It's left passengers feeling frustrated and confused.
We were hoping that the strike wasn't going to affect the trains. We heard it was called off, and now we're hoping for the best.
We wanted to go to Barnsley, but not doing no trains at all.
Fans attending the Wales Rugby Union match against New Zealand faced travel disruption.
I expected it to be a slow journey home. Yeah, I don't think it'll be pretty.
We need the train stopped at 5 o'clock, so we made the decision to drive in and book a hotel.
A reduced strike timetable means just 20% or so of services have run across England, Scotland and Wales. Those which did started much later this morning and will finish by the early evening. Thousands of members of the RMT union at 14 rail companies and Network Rail have been involved in this long-running dispute about pay, jobs and terms and conditions. The RMT says its previous strikes have helped the rail companies to see sense, and it says it's now looking forward to intensive negotiations where it says it's finally expecting to be made a pay offer to put to its membership. But make no mistake, this is a big shift for the union. It's the first time it's called off a strike to negotiate in 6 months of industrial action.
There's a whole range of issues. It's cost them a lot of money in striking up to now. They will never get it back, even with a big pay rise. Christmas is coming, energy costs, family pressures, all those things will come into play. Maybe there's just a bit of a desire to find a way out of this and an off-ramp.
Network Rail has made a pay offer of 8% over 2 years. It welcomed new talks, as did the rail operators, saying progress is being made. The new Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, said he wants to work positively and constructively with all the unions, and he's ruling nothing out in the search for a solution. The mood music might be changing, but for passengers, the cancellation of further strikes on Monday and Wednesday is too late to avoid further disruption. Mark Ashdown, BBC News.
Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill, speaking at her party's annual conference, has accused the Democratic Unionist Party of blocking the formation of a government to prevent a nationalist from becoming First Minister. Sinn Féin became the largest party at Stormont for the first time after an election in May. It meant Ms O'Neill was entitled to become Northern Ireland's First Minister. The DUP says it's refusing to enter into power sharing until its complaints about post-Brexit trade rules are addressed. Candlelight vigils have taken place in South Korea to remember the victims of last week's deadly crush that killed 156 people. The disaster in the capital Seoul a week ago during Halloween celebrations has caused growing public anger. Mourners, many holding placards and white candles, gathered in the city to demand justice. Our correspondent Nick Marsh has the story.
This city is still in shock. After one of the most terrible weeks in recent memory, adults came together to mourn the young. But the air is also thick with blame. Our children have been sacrificed, this woman says. I need to mourn. The Korean government has not done a good job. We want them to truly say sorry, and we want the president to resign. Last weekend, 156 mostly young people went out and didn't come back. It was supposed to be a fun Halloween night out, the first without COVID restrictions, but the authorities had made no plans for crowd control. This lone officer stumbled across the crush by chance. You can see him caught amongst the vast tide of bodies, desperately trying to divert them to safety. When I spoke to him a few days later, he was consumed by guilt.
I wasn't able to do my duty as a Korean police officer. If somehow there's a way to meet the bereaved families, I would like to express our apologies to them. Please pray for them.
Emotions are running high in South Korea. Yesterday, a victim's mother tore down the floral wreath that had been laid by the president. Today's gatherings may have been called vigils, but really, they were protests.
Over this past week, the grief and the shock has turned to anger and a demand for answers as to what could have possibly happened to allow such a tragedy on Saturday night. Now, the people who are gathered here are mainly supporters of the main political opposition. But throughout South Korea, there is the perception that a young generation has been let down by the authorities yet again.
The last time South Korea saw a loss of life this atrocious was in 2014, when more than 300, mainly school children, died in a ferry disaster. That eventually brought down the then president after a series of weekly protests. The people here say they'll be back next Saturday. Nick Marsh, BBC News, Seoul.
England's women will face the Rugby World Cup hosts and holders New Zealand in the final next Saturday. They saw off Canada, winning 26-19 in the semi-finals. Here's Joe Curry.
Excited and expectant. England supporters turning out in Auckland hoping for a straightforward route to the final. With an amateur Canada side standing in their way, confidence was high.
Rugby's coming home.
England are the #1 side in the world. They haven't lost a match now in over 3 years. Victory is something their fans have become accustomed to.
Something all of their opponents have become accustomed to is England's line-out and driving maul. And once again, it proved unstoppable as Marley Packer powered her way over the line. After England scored again, Canada could have been forgiven for letting their heads drop. Instead, they showed their grit and pace. As England's dominance weakened, Canada's confidence grew, finding the gap to pull themselves right back into the game before the break. But after the restart, a moment of magic. From behind their own try line, Claudia MacDonald made a break and found Abby Dow. From there, it was pure box office. The winger turning on the afterburners to power away.
Oh, that's a screamer!
Dow showing exactly why her teammates call her Abby Wow. Canada dotted down once more, but the game belonged to England. The relief evident at the final whistle as their place in the World Cup final was confirmed. Jo Curry, BBC News, Auckland.
That's it. We're back with the late news at 10 past 10. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.